Right now, buried in a VA file somewhere, there's a payment linked to your name. Not the one you're currently receiving, but the one your spouse is meant to collect after you pass away. Except most spouses never receive a cent of it. Not because they're ineligible, but because no one ever sat the veteran down to explain what needs to be filed, when it needs to be filed, or why the countdown on this benefit is already running while he's still living. My name is Nancy Ahad. I'm not a credentialed expert, but I spend my time explaining the financial side of veterans' benefits, the details nobody covers during the rating exam, the details that only surface as a crisis once it's too late to correct them. I'm here to share the kind of financial guidance that genuinely protects the people who rely on you. So if this is helpful, hit subscribe because I cover exactly this. One benefit, one form, one overlooked mistake, every single week. Let's begin with the part that blindsides nearly every veteran. Under federal law, VA disability compensation is paid to you, the veteran, for your service-connected conditions. It's not a household benefit. It's not a shared payment. It's not part of your estate. Title 38 of the United States Code makes this explicit. The legal basis for that payment exists only while you're alive to receive it. The instant you die, it ends. Not reduced, not paused, ended. It doesn't matter if you're rated at 100%. It doesn't matter if you're permanently and totally disabled. It doesn't matter if that deposit has landed in your account every month for 3 decades. The day you die, it stops, and your spouse doesn't inherit whatever remains of it, because nothing remains of it to inherit. Look at what that actually means in dollar terms. A veteran rated 100% receives roughly $3,830 a month in 2025. Depending on dependents, a veteran rated 70% receives closer to $1,760. Many veteran households rely on that income as their primary source. Some rely on it as their only source. And the day the veteran dies, that number drops to 0 without warning, without any transition period, without even a phone call. The VA won't call your spouse to walk her through what comes next. No advance letter arrives explaining the process. If a payment happens to post after the date of death, the VA will actually demand that money back. The system is designed to pay the veteran while he's alive. What happens to the family afterward is a completely separate program, requiring a completely separate application that someone has to know to submit. You won't hear this explained during your compensation and pension exam. You won't find it spelled out clearly on the VA's main benefits page. That's not some hidden agenda. It's simply how the system operates. It processes whatever gets submitted to it. No one there is measured on how well they prepared your family for the day you're gone. Now here's the part that matters most, because it's also the part where you still have room to act. Your spouse isn't without options. There's a federal program called Dependency and Indemnity Compensation, or DIC, run by the VA and paid monthly to qualifying surviving spouses. The current base rate is around $1,700 a month, and it's completely tax-free. That's over $20,000 a year your spouse would never pay taxes on. DIC also isn't needs-based and has nothing to do with your spouse's income or assets. A wealthy household and a struggling one get the exact same base payment if they qualify. But qualifying is the catch. And it's the catch that quietly costs families everything. Your spouse doesn't automatically receive DIC just because you were a veteran. She doesn't automatically receive it just because you died. Qualification comes down to one of 2 specific routes, and both routes depend on decisions made while you're still alive. That's the whole issue in a single sentence. The benefit is real. Qualifying for it depends on you, and you won't be around to fix it once the window closes. Let's walk through both routes, because most veterans have only ever heard of one, if they've heard of either at all. Route 1 is often called the 10-year rule, and it comes from 38U, Section 1318. If a veteran has been continuously rated at 100%, or at the combined level meeting the statutory threshold for 10 or more consecutive years right up until death, the surviving spouse qualifies for DIC regardless of what actually caused the death. Read that again. Regardless of what caused the death. Your spouse doesn't need to prove your death was connected to your service at all. The length of time you held, that rating establishes qualification on its own. Picture a veteran currently rated 80% who's held that rating for 7 years. His spouse doesn't yet qualify under Route 1. 3 years remain on that countdown, and the countdown only runs forward. It never resets, and it never returns time a veteran spent underrated simply because he never filed the claim that would have raised him sooner. Here's where veterans lose that window without ever noticing. A veteran reaches 60% or 70%, feels thankful for what he has, and stops filing. He doesn't want to seem like he's gaming the system, so the clock never starts, because the rating never hits the level required to start it. Every condition that's genuine, service-connected, and real, but never formally claimed, is a condition that doesn't count. If it's not filed, it's not rated. If it's not rated, it doesn't count toward that 10-year window. Log into your VA.gov account today. Not an old letter, but your actual current rating on file right now. And locate the effective date on your combined rating. That date is when your clock began, whether you realized it or not. Route 2 doesn't require 10 years at all, which is exactly why every veteran needs to hear about it. This one comes from 38U, Section 1310. If a veteran dies from a condition the VA has already recognized as service-connected, the surviving spouse qualifies for DIC. Your rating percentage at the time of death is irrelevant here. How many years you carried that rating is irrelevant too. If the condition that caused your death was already on your service-connected list before you died, your spouse qualifies. Period. Heart disease is the leading cause of death among men in the United States, and it's not close. It rarely announces itself in advance. Hypertension contributes to it. Untreated sleep apnea contributes to it. Chronic stress and elevated cortisol from something like PTSD contribute to it. Diabetes speeds it along. Even weight gain caused by medications prescribed for other service-connected conditions can contribute. There's substantial research linking each of these to military service. The physical strain, disrupted sleep patterns, environmental and toxic exposures, and the sustained psychological burden that comes with the job. So ask yourself the same 3 questions I ask every veteran who watches this. Do you have high blood pressure? Is it service-connected? Do you have sleep apnea? Is it service-connected? Do you have any cardiac condition at all? Arrhythmia, coronary artery disease, a past heart attack? Is it service-connected? If the answer to the first half of any of those is yes, and the second half is no, Route 2 currently offers your spouse zero protection. There's an angle almost nobody thinks to check. Ischemic heart disease is a presumptive condition tied to certain toxic exposures, including Agent Orange. If you served during a qualifying period and location, and you've since developed a heart condition, the connection may already be presumed under the law. You might not even need to build a causal case from the ground up. Most veterans never check, because nobody ever tells them to. Take a veteran named Gerald. He's 64, a retired Army infantry sergeant from outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. He's been rated 70% for a back condition and a knee condition since 2017. He's also had hypertension for 11 years, medicated daily, and never filed a claim for it because he figured a blood pressure prescription wasn't worth the paperwork. Gerald hasn't reached 10 years on a qualifying rating, so Route 1 doesn't cover his spouse yet. And if Gerald has a fatal cardiac event tomorrow, Route 2 won't cover her either, because the condition that would have killed him was never on his service-connected list. Gerald didn't do anything wrong. He simply never filed the one claim that would have closed the gap. Now let's talk about something almost nobody mentions, because it isn't the headline benefit. It's the one layered quietly on top of it. Under 38U, Section 1311, there's a supplemental DIC payment available to surviving spouses who meet one extra condition. If the veteran was rated 100% or at the qualifying combined threshold for a continuous period of at least 8 years right up until death, and the veteran and spouse were married to each other for that entire 8-year stretch, the surviving spouse receives an additional payment of roughly $360 a month on top of the base DIC amount, every month for the rest of her life. This bonus doesn't require 10 years. It doesn't require the death itself to be service-connected. It requires 8 continuous years at the qualifying rating, an unbroken marriage throughout that period, and a surviving spouse who actually knows to request it, because the VA doesn't calculate this automatically and apply it for her. It must be requested in writing on the application itself, and here's where it compounds. If your spouse qualifies under Route 1 and also meets the 8-year marriage requirement, she receives both amounts combined, the base DIC payment plus the $360 supplement stacked together. That's meaningful monthly income for someone who may be managing a household entirely on her own for the first time. There's also a scenario most families never consider. What happens if you have a claim sitting open and unresolved the moment you die? It doesn't simply disappear. There's a process called substitution, where your spouse can legally step into your place and continue the exact claim you already started, using VA Form 2-1-0847, Request for Substitution of Claimant. She has 1 year from your date of death to file it. If that claim gets approved after you're gone, she can collect the retroactive back pay that would have been yours, and an approved rating from that claim can also help establish her DIC eligibility. Almost nobody knows this form exists until they need it, and by then the clock is already running. Before we get to the exact steps, there's a second program worth knowing about, mainly because families constantly confuse it with DIC. It's called the VA Survivor's Pension. Unlike DIC, it's needs-based, tied to your spouse's income and assets, with a net worth limit currently around $163,000, not counting the home or one vehicle. There's also a 3-year look-back period on asset transfers, so giving assets away right before applying can trigger a penalty. If your spouse happens to qualify for both DIC and the survivor's pension, the VA automatically pays whichever benefit is higher, and in nearly every case, that's DIC. The survivor's pension exists as a backstop, not the primary target. Everything you do now should be aimed at securing DIC first. One more detail spouses need to know before anything else: remarriage. If your spouse remarries before age 55, she loses DIC entirely. If she remarries at 55 or older, she keeps it. That threshold surprises nearly everyone the first time they hear it, and it's worth saying out loud now rather than letting her discover it by accident later. If there are dependent children involved, separate DIC provisions apply to them as well, on top of whatever your spouse receives. DIC isn't the only thing tied to that qualification either. Once a spouse is approved for DIC, a whole second layer of benefits often opens up that almost nobody explains at the same time. If a surviving spouse needs regular help with daily activities, bathing, dressing, managing medication, simply getting around the house safely, she may qualify for an additional aid and attendance allowance on top of the base DIC payment, similar in concept to the special monthly compensation a veteran can receive while alive. The exact phrase aid and attendance has to appear in the written application for that review to be triggered, the same way it works on a veteran's own claim. Leave that language out, and the extra allowance frequently never gets evaluated at all. Healthcare is the next piece families miss. A surviving spouse who qualifies for DIC is generally eligible for CHAMPVA, a health insurance program that covers a large share of medical costs for spouses and dependent children of veterans who died from a service-connected condition, or who were rated permanently and totally disabled at the time of death. For a spouse who loses access to a veteran's other coverage the same month she loses his income, this alone can be the difference between manageable medical costs and a financial emergency stacked on top of a loss she's still processing. Education benefits carry forward too, and this one surprises nearly every family the first time they hear it. Under the Survivors and Dependents Educational Assistance Program, commonly called Chapter 35, a qualifying spouse or dependent child can receive up to 45 months of financial support for college, technical training, or an apprenticeship. There's a newer, generally more generous version called the Fry Scholarship, tied to veterans who died in the line of duty or from a service-connected condition. In many cases, a spouse or child can choose whichever program pays out better for their situation. Neither arrives automatically. Both require a separate application most families never realize exists until years after it would have been useful. Home loan benefits extend to a portion of surviving spouses, too. If your spouse qualifies for DIC, she may be eligible for a VA-backed home loan certificate of eligibility in her own name, the same zero down payment, competitive rate benefit veterans use, now available to her directly. For a spouse who needs to relocate, downsize, or simply refinance after losing your income, that's a resource that rarely gets mentioned in the middle of DIC paperwork, even though it's directly tied to the same qualification. Then there's the piece nobody wants to think about but every family eventually needs: burial. Veterans who meet basic service requirements are generally eligible for burial in a VA national cemetery at no cost to the family, along with a headstone or marker and, in some cases, a burial flag and presidential memorial certificate. A spouse or dependent child can often be buried in the same plot. If your family prefers a private cemetery instead, a partial VA burial allowance may still apply. None of this is complicated once someone knows to ask for it. But in the middle of a funeral, it's exactly the kind of detail that gets missed if it isn't written down somewhere in advance. Several states layer their own benefits directly on top of DIC eligibility as well. A number of states offer full or partial property tax exemptions, specifically for surviving spouses of veterans who were rated 100% or who died from a service-connected cause. And some extend that exemption for as long as the spouse doesn't remarry. A handful of states go further, offering reduced vehicle registration fees, hunting and fishing license waivers, or preference points on state employment applications. These benefits exist entirely outside the federal DIC system, which means qualifying for DIC doesn't automatically trigger them. Your spouse has to know they exist and apply for them separately through your state's Department of Veterans Affairs. Consider a spouse named Patricia, married to a veteran named Walter for 38 years before he passed away from a service-connected respiratory condition tied to burn pit exposure. Patricia's DIC claim was approved within a few months because Walter's condition had already been rated before he died. What Patricia didn't know, because nobody told her at the time, was that she also qualified for CHAMPVA, for a property tax exemption in her home state, and for a home loan certificate of eligibility she ended up using 2 years later to downsize into a smaller house near her daughter. None of that arrived automatically alongside her DIC approval letter. She found out about each one separately, months apart, mostly by accident, through conversations with other veteran spouses in a support group. Walter had done everything right on his end. The gap wasn't in his paperwork. It was in nobody ever handing Patricia a complete picture of everything his service had already earned her. That's exactly why Step 5 in a moment isn't just about the DIC form. It's about making sure your spouse has the full picture in front of her, not just the first piece of it. Now, since I mentioned it earlier, every veteran family loses money to the same root cause. Benefits that exist on paper but never get filed because nobody flags them. So, here's what I want you to do. The exemptions, the breaks, and the survivor protections most veteran households already qualify for but never claim. I've compiled them all in one place, state by state, form by form, so you don't waste hours digging through government websites trying to piece it together yourself. Everything is laid out simply and quickly, so any veteran or spouse can find exactly what applies to them. No matter what state you're in, there's money being left unclaimed. It's called the VA Survivor Protection Playbook, and it's linked in the pinned comment right below this video. Just tap it once and you'll have everything you need. Stay with me because the last one is the biggest bonus most spouses never claim, and it's the reason I made this whole video. Take a veteran named Dennis. He's 67, a retired Marine from outside Jacksonville, Florida. He reached 100% combined back in 2014 and has held it continuously ever since. He's been married to his wife for 31 years. Dennis has already cleared the 8-year bonus threshold. If he passed away today, his wife would automatically qualify for that extra $360 a month. But Route 1, the full 10-year rule, depends entirely on his exact effective date clearing a full decade, not just coming close. Dennis needs to verify that date precisely because the difference between 9 years and 10 years on paper is the difference between his wife having an automatic, unquestioned qualifier and having to fight for one. Dennis didn't do anything wrong either. He simply never checked the exact date. For a lower-income veteran household living primarily off that VA payment, closing these gaps is the difference between a spouse maintaining stability after a death and facing a financial cliff the same month as the funeral. For a more financially secure household, this isn't survival money. It's protection that was already earned through decades of service and shouldn't sit unclaimed simply because nobody connected the dots in time. Before we move to the exact steps, let's clear up a few misconceptions that trip up nearly every family I talk to, because getting these wrong is just as costly as never filing at all. The first is assuming DIC and Social Security survivor benefits work the same way, or that one cancels out the other. They don't. DIC comes from the VA and is entirely separate from Social Security. A surviving spouse can generally receive both at the same time, in full, without one reducing the other. Families sometimes assume applying for one disqualifies them from the other, and that assumption alone has kept spouses from filing for months or years longer than necessary. The second misconception involves divorce and prior marriages. DIC eligibility is tied to the marriage at the time of death, not how many marriages came before it. If you were previously divorced and have since remarried, your current spouse is the one whose eligibility matters for DIC, provided the marriage requirements, including the 8-year continuous marriage window for the bonus payment (AKAI), are met from your current marriage forward. If you have questions about a specific situation involving a prior marriage, a former spouse with dependent children, or a marriage that was interrupted and later resumed, that's exactly the kind of detail an accredited veteran service officer can walk through with you individually at no cost. The third misconception is assuming that because a veteran's cause of death is listed as something vague like natural causes on a death certificate, Route 2 is automatically closed. It isn't. What legally matters is whether a service-connected condition caused or substantially contributed to the death. A knowledgeable veteran service officer, or in some cases a private medical opinion, can help establish that connection even when the death certificate itself uses general language. Don't assume the door is shut just because the hospital or coroner's paperwork was vague. The fourth misconception, and maybe the most damaging one, is veterans assuming that because they're young and healthy right now, none of this applies to them yet. The 10-year clock and the 8-year clock don't start when a veteran feels ready to think about mortality. They start on the effective date of the qualifying rating, whenever that happens to be. A veteran who reaches 100% at 45 and lives to 85 has had that clock quietly running for 4 decades, but only if the rating was filed and locked in early. Waiting until retirement age to deal with this someday is often the single biggest reason families end up short of both thresholds when it matters most. One last thing worth knowing before you start: you don't have to navigate any of this alone, and you shouldn't pay anyone to help you with the initial steps. Accredited veteran service officers through organizations like the American Legion, the VFW, the DAV, or your state's Department of Veterans Affairs review files like yours every single day, free of charge, and can usually tell within a single conversation exactly where you stand on both clocks and which conditions are worth pursuing. The VA maintains a searchable directory of accredited representatives directly on VA.gov. Nobody accredited through that system is permitted to charge you a fee for help filing an initial claim, and any request for upfront payment to expedite your case is a signal to walk away, not a shortcut worth taking. So here's the exact sequence in order starting this week. Step 1. Confirm your current rating and your effective date. Log into VA.gov, pull up your disability rating, and find the effective date tied to your current combined rating. Subscribe to the Benefit Bench channel for more valuable content. Goodbye.